Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. I'm a businessman, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a CPA that's worked in the investment and financial services industry. I've also started multiple companies that have achieved millions of dollars in sales and that have sold with multi-million dollar valuations. You can find out more about my background at our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Join us in conversations that we have every week outside of the podcast by following me on Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. Lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, so that you get the updates every week when we post the video version of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us each and every Wednesday to talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. This week, we have a guest that I've gotten to know better over the last few years. His name is Howard Ludwigson. And Howard is 80 years old, and he's seen so many things throughout his life, and he's had so many amazing entrepreneurial experiences. He's been a teacher, he's been a principal, he's been a real estate investor, he's an owner in the bank, he sits on the bank's board, and a lot of the advice that he has to provide to us is unique and very motivating just because he's seen so much. So, joining us this week is Howard Ludwigson. Hello, Howard. Thank you so much for joining us on the Andrew Holland Podcast, and welcome.
Well, hey, thanks for having me on this. I'm a little nervous on this because I haven't done this type of thing before, but hey, look forward to it.
Oh, you'll be a pro. You've got so much experience, and that's where I want to start. So, before we get into a lot of the advice and the words of wisdom you have provided me in our coffee meetings when we get the opportunity to do those, give our audience a sense of your background. You've been a principal, you've been a teacher, you own part of a bank, you're on the board of the bank, you're a large real estate investor. But take us back. Take us back to your childhood. Where did you grow up? How did you grow up? How did you get this entrepreneurial spirit that encouraged you to get involved in taking risks and getting into so many things that are very entrepreneurial driven?
Well, going back to my childhood, I grew up in Bloomer, Wisconsin.
Okay.
I went to St. Peter and Paul's Catholic school there through eighth grade. I had a paper route when I was a kid, and that was a pretty interesting experience because it was a lot of work in sometimes in terrible weather, and you had to be used to meeting with people and collecting the money, of course, for the papers from them, and keeping track of the records and keeping their little slippy things and stuff like that. And my dad was very helpful on that. A lot of this, I think that I developed was probably through my father. He did not graduate from high school. He went only through sixth grade, but he loved to read. He was an avid reader, read a lot of things, and when I was a really little kid, he had an egg route. He would pick up and deliver eggs, sometimes all the way up into northern Michigan.
Wow.
And so we would see him on the weekends, but during the week, a lot of times he was overnight up in northern Michigan or whatever. And but that was his job, and he would do that diligently. And then we rented a farmhouse out in rural Bloomer. And I remember my older brother and sister went to rural school. And one of the old, everybody shows up at the school, no matter what your age was, the old country school concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my older sister teaching me one day, because the teacher, Miss Black, she had other things that she was doing and stuff like that. So my sister Anita would teach. But we would walk about 3/4 of a mile to that school. When I wasn't even old enough to go to that school, but Miss Black said, "Well, Howard should come along. He picks up on things pretty quickly and stuff like that. Just bring him along."
Yeah.
It
What
was
year would this have been?
interesting concept compared to the education, things that I went through later, and was in charge of later.
Yeah.
That was interesting educational concept. But we all learned, and we all, ended up being somewhat successful at that. Then we moved into Bloomer, and uh, my dad, uh, uh, my dad went to the FBI school and became one of the policemen up there. There were three policemen, uh, one for every 8 hours, I think, of the day or whatever. And
Yep.
sometimes they would not have a policeman because these people would have to have off once in a while on weekends and stuff. Uh, and eventually, people liked him and stuff like that. He had a decent personality and stuff. So he became the mayor of Bloomer, which was interesting because he became the mayor on a write-in ballot, and he wasn't even running. I mean,
That's
but
hard
the
to do.
city was having a lot of problems and stuff like that, and so he won handily as a write-in candidate. He wasn't even trying to do that, and I learned a lot of things because of his involvement there in politics and how that worked, and of course back then uh, there wasn't the Democrat Republican thing so much as there was, hey, let's take a look at issues. And some people had some ideas on them, some others had some other ideas. And so you compromised and you got things done.
Sure.
So that was my dad originally. And later, after he was mayor for about 4 years, he ran for the county board. And so he represented the city of Bloomer on the Chippewa County board. Uh, he also was an entrepreneur. I, Dad was, he also went to some of the technical college classes and learned about carpentry and had a carpentry business for about a year where he was doing cabinets and things like that for people. And eventually, that turned into people wanted additions on their house. They wanted other things done other than just cabinets that he made in his garage. So eventually, he had three other carpenters that worked for him, and they did a lot of the carpentry work and stuff like that up in Bloomer. I remember when I was going to high school, I had the best forearms and calluses all over on my hands because one of the other carpenters and I were the roofing people. And so we'd crawl up on the roof, and of course, you didn't have the nail guns back then.
Mm-hmm.
You had your hammer and your apron, and you put the roofing nails into these shingles. And so I had plenty of calluses. I had some black and blue fingernails here once in a while too, because you didn't always hit those squarely. And that's, that's what I would do for a couple of summers.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, as you know, I've got a construction company. I can't
right,
imagine roofing a roof without an automatic nail gun.
right. And
Oh,
we would get the two of us would get an average roof. Of course, the roofs weren't as big back then as they are now, but a typical two-bedroom house up in Bloomer, we'd get that done in 2 days if the weather was good.
yeah.
And so, and of course, you didn't have the elevator to take the bundles of shingles up onto the roof and stuff like that. And of course, me being the young, stronger guy, that's what would happen. I'd take him up there and get him unbundled and stuff like that. And he would, Mr. Roof, he would get him started. That was his name, by the way, RUF, Mr. Roof.
The
He would,
gentleman that you worked with, that
right,
did.
yeah, he would get everything started and stuff like that, and then I would just follow along on the rows and know where to put them and stuff like this.
So
Uh,
your strong sense of work ethic clearly came from your dad.
Oh, yes.
and he involved you in the businesses. What
Right.
year was it that you had the paper out that kind of got you started on your own thing?
Probably about 1958,
Okay.
57, 58.
And you were what,
I
10 years
have,
old, 12 years old, 14 years old at that
yeah,
time?
12, 13 years old. Yeah,
Okay.
13, 14 years old. Right. Um, and bicycled around to do that and stuff like this. If it was raining, mother would take me around once in a while, or my older brother Russell. He was reluctant to do that, but he would do it at dad's insistence and whatever.
How many siblings are there?
There are five of us. I'm right in the middle, which is also a neat place to be because you learn how to assuage the older ones so you don't get pounded, and and also to take care of the younger ones. So I was right in the middle of five, a older brother and sister, and a younger brother and sister.
That's the toughest spot to be. So, kudos to you, and I think that probably helped
Well, and
in your
then
development.
continuing the story on Dad, as that progressed and so forth, a police officer once in a while, and then carpentry. He eventually borrowed some money and bought a couple of school buses, and he did the transportation for the elementary schools in Bloomer. And eventually that expanded so that he transported all the students to the Bloomer School District. So that was his next bit. I mean, he was not particularly afraid to try something new after he had figured it all out and stuff like this.
Mhm.
And of course, there were ups and downs to all of that, and I learned all of that. As a kid, that things didn't always go just the way you had planned them. Sometimes they went better, sometimes they went worse. Uh, so you learn that type of thing in life too, and a lot of that was because of all the different things that Dad was involved in.
So you
So that was
become
kind of my history, and then the last interesting thing before I went off to college, the last summer, I worked at the Bloomer canning factory. We were on Oak Street in Bloomer, and the canning factory was right in back of us. And I could walk across the railroad tracks and go to work. And the interesting thing about that work over there was that myself and two other guys took care of the warehouse. So as the canned corn and peas and beans or whatever would come through, we would box them through a boxer, and we would store them in the warehouse. That was our job. Well, every once in a while, the canning factory would shut down because there was a mechanical problem, or because they were changing labels from Libby to a generic label, which went off to the service and to the government things, or to Del Monte, or I mean, it was all the same stuff, really. Maybe they changed the formula a little bit or something like that, but mainly it was changing the labels from the machines and stuff. And that sometimes took 2 or 3 hours. Well, what we would do is one of us would be on the alert and stuff like that. The other two would go off and sleep on these bags that the cans came in, on the railroad cars. And so we were putting in ungodly number of hours during the week. And a lot of that was sleeping there at the canning factory. Uh,
wow.
but
How old were you?
well, I was senior in high school, so
Okay, so about 18.
17, 17, 18 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, but put in gobs of hours there. I mean, didn't get much per hour, but hey, put in lots of hours. It was not unusual to have 90-hour weeks
Wow.
because you could do a lot of your resting and stuff like that on the job, and
Mhm.
that's fine. They would pay you for that because they needed to have somebody there in the warehouse as soon as everything started working again.
Mhm.
And so we just took our turns doing that. And the boxing machine was very interesting because the cans would come down in three different rows, and when the rows were filled up, you'd push this pedal on the floor, and that would push them into the box that was over the top of this boxer. That was the first row. Then you'd wait until all that was ready, and then you'd push it again, and that was the second row. the box then would drop down and go up an elevator into the warehouse, and they would take care of it in there. Uh, but sometimes when the cans came down through, they weren't coming down through straight. And if you hit the boxing machine at that point, that can would spray all over the place and stuff like that. So it took a special amount of patience and stuff to run that machine. But you also had to do it fairly quickly. I mean, you had to keep going as these cans were coming through. So
Well,
interesting job.
yeah, I mean, those amount of hours are really kind of combined with the work ethic that you were raised with, I think set you up for a tremendous amount of success later on to do the number of entrepreneurial ventures that you did. So I want to talk more specifically about those things. But before we do that, just briefly give us a synopsis of you go to college, and so from college to now, and how your life has progressed. Um, Give us an idea relatively quickly.
Well, I went down to Elma, Wisconsin, and stayed at my uncle's right after high school. I went to the Buffalo County Teachers College, a 2-year teachers college, because back then, and they should probably look at something like that yet today. You wanted to be a teacher, and so you went for that for 2 years. You did your practicum, your student teaching and stuff out in one of the local school districts. Okay, and then you could go out and teach. Uh, you had to, of course, continue to get the rest of your education over the summers or when courses were available, so that you ended up eventually with your 4-year degree. But in the meantime, you were teaching and you were making some money so that you could afford to do that and use some of that to get your degree. So I did that. And after those 2 years, I taught at in Adams, Minnesota. I taught over there for 4 years, and in the summers, I went to University of Wisconsin Eau Claire and got my regular degree. I After I got my regular degree, I was hired in Eau Claire School District. I am taught in 4 different elementary schools: McKinley School, Black School, Sherman School, and Mann School. Before I retired, so elementary school teacher mainly. But
Okay.
living out in the town of Seymour, I got interested in the politics part of it because the city was putting a landfill in out in the town of Seymour. And of course, the residents had a whole lot of problems with that and a whole bunch of questions about that. So, uh, our county board supervisor at the time wasn't really addressing those. And I said, hey, we should have some control over what's going to happen out there, even though we didn't, because the city bought the land to put this on, and uh, kind of illegally they annexed it into the city of Eau Claire, even though it had no connection to the city or whatever. The circuit judges allowed that to happen because, frankly, they needed a landfill. The one out in the town of Union, was having problems and stuff.
Hmm.
So I ran for the county board, was elected to the county board, and we did start a waste waste disposal committee, and I was the chairman of that. And eventually, since the other townships in the county were having problems with their local small little landfills, uh, eventually they had to do something to comply with the new DNR regulations, and so uh, the county eventually purchased the landfill from the city of Eau Claire and it became a county landfill. And that was kind of nice in a way because then the rural county board supervisors had a lot more control over
Sure.
what was happening out there. So that worked well for the residents in the town of Seymour because now their issues were being addressed. And so I was reelected and so forth, and progressed up through the county board as chairman of the Planning Development Committee and the Airport Commission, um, Waste Waste Control Committee, and eventually was elected as the vice chairman of the board. Cliff Chatterson was the chairman, and Cliff was an interesting protege for me and mentor because Cliff was manager at Uniroyal. And of course, he had lots of experience in terms of business and budgeting and things like
Yeah.
this.
So for
And
our listeners, Uniroyal was a big tire plant in the city
oh,
of Eau Claire,
absolutely
where I'm from. That I
right,
mean, it was huge, and it probably made a good portion of the majority of the tires throughout the country, quite frankly, or at
right.
least was a large.
Uniroyal tires, right?
Yeah,
Uniroyal tires, one of the bigger tire manufacturers, no question.
and if you,
And of course, that closed down 30 years ago, and
hmm
I was the vice chairman of the board, and Cliff was the chairman. So we had to work this out with the state of Wisconsin, with Technical College, with the university. What's going to happen now to these 2,800 employees, the biggest employer in Eau Claire by far,
hmm
and those were good paying jobs. So what was going to happen with all that? So we were involved in a lot of that with economic development and how to how to educate and re-educate, I guess, these workers so that they could take part in other things. And to a certain extent, that was successful. But for a lot of them, a lot of them moved to other locations, other Uniroyal plants, and so forth. But that was an interesting experience to go through, also, and a very
yeah,
interesting learning
I can
experience.
imagine. And so
So then,
you,
eventually, after that, I was elected as the county board chairman, and that was those positions are elected by the county board themselves. And I served in that for 10 years and 30 years altogether on the Eau Claire County Board, which was a very interesting learning experience. No doubt about that. You knew the
from an
community.
entrepreneurial perspective, what did that 30 years of service really to the people of those municipalities? How did that aid you in some of the entrepreneurial endeavors that you undertook throughout that time frame and thereafter?
Well, that certainly gave me an opportunity to know and to become friends of some of the major entrepreneurs in Eau Claire. I mean, I could list off 8 or 10 of them that the county board had to have experiences with because they were building buildings, they were doing all kinds of different things in the community, from the education standpoint to hospitals to businesses to rentals, housing, whatever. I knew all of those people and had to deal with all of those people, starting with the Planning and Development Committee, where I was the chairman, and
Hmm
all the way up through to being chairman of the county board. Interesting. Uh, when one of the businesses that came in after Uniroyal was HTI, Hutchison Technologies, built a big factory out on the west side of Eau Claire. That was on county land, okay, and that was part of the old hospital, county hospital, which we no longer were running, and so that was a county farm, and so that land was really usable now. It was interesting because Mr. Green, the chairman and one of the big stockholders of Hutchison Technologies, uh, flew into town one day out to the Eau Claire County Airport with his airplane. Unannounced, he just flew into the airport and he wanted to rent a car. Well, this was on the weekend. The car rental places were not open. But the secretary out at the airport, out at the Gibson Aviation, uh, where that was open, uh, and she said, "Well, what are you going to do and stuff like that? Or where are you going to go?" Well, I want to look at some land over on the west side of Eau Claire, and I just needed to have a car. Well, you can use my car. She said, here's the keys to it. I'm going to be working here anyway because there's some airplanes, private airplanes coming and going and stuff. And so he used her car, went out and looked at this land that they eventually built their factory on, came back, and flew out with his own plane, back to Minnesota. And he used that story in terms because there were like three different cities that were competing to try to get Hutchison Technologies here.
hmm
And he used that story as one of the determining factors of, okay, that says something about this community. When you fly into an airport, they don't know crap about you, and they let you use their car, to go out on the west side of Eau Claire to look at something. And I never introduced myself as anybody that was of any import, other than the fact that, I did have a plane, which I suppose she figured, all right, this guy's got to be somewhat responsible.
Yeah.
But he said, hey, it wasn't like I was waiting around for them to call somebody that might come out to the airport. No, well, just take my car. You're only going to be gone for a half an hour. So he went out, took pictures and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great story. Those were the good old days.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
right.
that would
Yeah,
ever happen now.
right. Yeah.
But
So anyway, it's
so
those kind of connections and stuff like that eventually became really important.
so what was your first entrepreneurial endeavor?
First one was rentals, buying into rentals. My wife was a teacher. We had 4 kids, and we were making enough money. We were paying all kinds of taxes, and so had an opportunity with 3 other guys, again through county board connections, to be able to get into 3 8-plexes that this woman's husband was in their 40s, and he was a contractor, a building contractor, and he built these kind of as a retirement thing and stuff, and was running them. Well, in his mid 40s, he had a heart attack, massive heart attack, passed away. So she was left with trying to manage these, and of course she had no management abilities and stuff like that. A lacrosse bank had the money in these, and so they contacted one of us and said, um, why don't you talk to her and take over this loan, because we're not real comfortable with it right now. And so
Hmm.
that's what the 4 of us did. We took over that loan, borrowed some money to start this realtor LLC, and one of them was the manager. Okay, became the manager. That went along fine for several years, until he got into trouble with by expanding way too much during the times when uh, building building prices and homes and stuff like that were escalating in prices.
What year was
And
this?
uh, oh, um, probably 2007, 2008, right in there, where we had that,
Great
and
financial crisis. Yep.
so, yeah. And I had a discussion with him one day. I remember that discussion when he was saying, well, all these properties are going up at 5, 6, 7% a year. I should get into these. They're going to be valuable. And I said, well, the problem that you have to remember is that the the wages for the people that eventually are going to have to buy your houses are going up by only 2 or 3%. Eventually, I, that has to change, and these places cannot be worth that much money eventually, because nobody's going to be able to afford them. Well, he didn't heed that advice. He got in way too thick with what he was doing. Well, he went bankrupt. So now the rest of us were faced with, do you want a bankrupt partner? Uh, he was one of our key people, and he was the property manager. So through the courts, through his bankruptcy, a couple of us purchased his share of those units through the courts, because obviously he had creditors that needed to be paid off, and so he had to take his he had to get out of that eventually. So we did that. We took a chance again, kind of from my dad. Sharpen the pencil, do this, see if this makes sense at this price, through the courts. And that worked out really well. And it ended up then that there were 3 of us. The 2 of us owned, 47% of it. each owned 47%. So it was like 90% of it.
Yeah.
And the third partner was a minor partner. So and those did really well. Uh, we hired another property manager in Eau Claire that managed the properties because we were still working yet
Mm-hmm.
as pharmacists and stuff like this. So um, and that worked out really pretty well. Use some of the equity in that to build two fourplexes here in Eau Claire that I still own. And Also, we purchased the building downtown that the Social Security was in at one point, but eventually it was Department of Workforce Development. We purchased that, rented that out to the state for a number of years, sold that to Brian Johnson, who was coming into town, and was, getting into the real estate business and stuff like that. So that's kind of where all that went. The Briar Lane, the three eightplexes, we sold those here about a year and a half or 2 years ago. Made a lot of money on those, but had to pay a lot of taxes because the LLC, because of our ages of us, we did not want to go off and spend that money into some other investment,
Mm-hmm.
as the same LLC, because you have the problem of if something happened to one of us, where the other one's going to buy out their share, and then you would have to dissolve, under somebody else's circumstances rather than your own. So the prices of those were very high, still are high for rentals. Uh, so we sold out of those, and we also sold the building downtown, and that, of course, is gone now. That old Farmer Beaver building, and that's rentals again.
Yeah.
Some pretty high end
One of the
rentals.
thing one of the things I love about the story that you just talked about, Howard, is so many issues that many entrepreneurs and business owners face throughout the course of their endeavors. What do you do when you have bankrupt business partners? Things to consider when you're forming the LLCs and legal paperwork. If one person passes away, how are you going to determine the value to buy out that person's share as opposed to it going to the estate? I mean, there's all these complex things that you really need to think about or prepare for in advance of them actually happening. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily put the due diligence or the time in up front so that when those situations arise, they have already thought about it, they've addressed them, and it's a lot smoother if they had done that. So I guess what I would say to our listeners is think about that. If you haven't started business yet, or if you are in business, take a look at your operating agreement. Does it address some of these issues? If you're in business with a partner, claims bankruptcy, if one of them passes away, if one of them wants to get out and sell the business, what are the valuation methods you're going to use? It's not
Right.
necessarily the fun side of business, but it's really important side of business.
Well, I like to compare it to like an athletic event. You're involved in a competition, and there's all kinds of other people out there. And instead of this being the fastball or the long pass or something like this, it's uh, it's kind of competing on the entrepreneur side of our economy with others. And if you have a good team, and I stress the team part because most of these things, if you talk to somebody, it was not alone all by themselves that they somehow, ended up, successful at something. It was because of family. It was because of other relationships that you had that helped to, you have your talents and stuff like that at looking at and assessing things, but then you have others, just like on a baseball team, you have a pitcher that's really good at pitching, but then you have a shortstop, and then you have a home run hitter, and each of them brings a particular amount of expertise to that team, but it's what they do together that makes a big difference. And I like to use that analogy, I think, for businesses. And even if you own a business, uh, how do you treat and how do you take care of the important employees that you have that really are like the shortstop and the home run hitter? I mean, without them, you don't have a team.
Yeah.
So if you
That's a
use
great
that
analogy.
analogy, and then of course you have other teams out there that you're competing against, and so sometimes you end up with other teams' players.
Yep. Yep.
Just like in terms of the real estate things and stuff like that. The four of us that eventually got together, we each brought something important to the table in terms of legal expertise, financial expertise, people skills, all of those things that go into making something successful. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think that you can do this yourself,
It,
and it's not going to happen.
no, it's not.
Banks were extremely important all the way through that.
Yeah.
Finance, uh, you have to have good credibility. You have to have good credit. You have to be able to pay your debts, and that was important too.
So that's a perfect segue, Howard, because you are part owner in a small regional bank, which apt timing given what we're seeing in the regional banking system. And I'll
Right,
ask a few questions on those.
right.
But one of the things that's most challenging for a lot of new entrepreneurs and small businesses is exactly what you just addressed is getting financing. So given all of your experience both on the entrepreneurial side with real estate and being part owner of the bank and on the board, and then that experience that being a part of that bank gives you in terms of all of the deals that you see come through, what advice would you give to them, those entrepreneurs that want to start something or are struggling in their first few years, as many small businesses are, to help them better understand or put together a package that will give someone like you that's reviewing these for loan terms or for credit comfort around extending credit to them?
Well, of course, I like to look at the three C's for any loan that's coming through us that the board of directors has to see. A lot of them we don't have to see, but the larger ones are the ones that are kind of iffy. The board of directors has to take a look at, and what kind of capital does somebody have that's coming into that, uh, and what kind of
So, how
credit?
much skin in the game do they have?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And what kind of credit do they have? uh, and that's not necessarily their credit score. There's other things that are involved in that, and of course, one of the big important things is their character, and that's one of the things that I question our staff on when we get some of these iffy ones. Uh, what do we know about this person? What kind of a relationship have we had with them? What's their relationship out in the community? What type of character do they have? That sometimes, for me at least, that becomes an important consideration in terms of they might not have the best credit score and they might not have all the capital that we want, but they're respected. Their character is good, and then that they're going to do everything possible to repay you. So uh, those things are important. Uh, it's it's also what do you have out there for collateral? That's another C. What collateral does this person have? And that's kind of like capital, although capital is sometimes a lot more fluid, liquid
Yeah.
than collateral. Collateral would be land and buildings and offices and things like this. Uh, I've been lucky on the board that I've been in, the bank I've been involved in, which is about 20 years now, because I was on the board of that bank before they were sold,
Mm.
and the owners were elderly. In fact, he had passed away. She was trying to run the bank, and she was elderly, having problems doing that, and so she put the bank up for sale. Well, interesting in terms of relationships. A former student of mine was amongst those that purchased the bank, and he called me as one of the possibilities of, hey, you're on this board, you know this bank better than most people do. Would you want to become one of the owners? And I said, well, hey, I'm 72 years old. I mean, do I want to do that or not? It's
I
and So he convinced me that yes, and he wanted me to stay on the board, to have some experience on there because he was going to lose a couple of board members, when this purchase was done. And so interesting, I became part owner, a minor owner, because there's like 20 shares to this bank, or 100,000 shares to this bank, and I have like 2,500 of them. So I've got
hmm
like the ownership of 2.5% of a of a bank.
It's
But
ownership nonetheless.
but yeah, well, and it was important to him because he's got about 20% of it. But it was important to him to have some people on the board that had some skin in the game.
hmm
Some of the other board members do not, but they're important. They're important people that you know make good decisions and stuff like that, even though they probably aren't one. And regulators kind of like that too, where it isn't just always the owners of the bank; it's other people out in the community that have some input into some of these loans and stuff.
Yeah, that
So
makes a lot of sense.
right, so that's how I became a very minor owner of a bank. But the important thing about that bank and why I decided that to put some of my collateral into that was the type of bank that it was. Two things. One, this bank, Oakwood Bank, has about 60% of its loans in egg businesses. And I learned from being on this board for as long as I did, have been, that there were ups and downs in the economy. There were times when, you know, uh, real estate in the commercial and residential and rental businesses were really down, and you didn't have enough collateral there to cover some of these loans. And some of these other bank directors uh, who are friends of mine and stuff like that, they said, "Oh my gosh, Howard, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, farmland always kept its value. That land was important, and it kept its collateral through these ups and downs and everything else. Farmland seemed to hold its value, and you always had collateral there. And the farmers generally were able to sell their crops and things like that and continue on, as business people, where others had problems because their collateral was going down in value and their loans, they did not have enough collateral to cover some of those loans, and that was a problem for banking.
hmm
And it's a problem in some banks right now,
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
if you want to talk about some of the banking things, some of those banks, they had borrowed millions and millions of dollars to tech startups and things like this. Where what is your collateral? Well, your collateral is really only a your intellectual property that you have, and if it isn't popular and if it doesn't sell, you don't have buildings, you don't have farmland, you don't have all of this equipment, you don't have that you can sell out. You really have nothing.
Yeah,
And
there's nothing really tangible there.
no, no,
So I want to first off, I to kind of cap the segue. I think that advice that you provided is so helpful for all of us as entrepreneurs. The four C's: the capital, the credit, the collateral, and that last one for character. I
right,
can't I can't overstate that enough. And we heard it directly from you, who is seeing multiple loan requests on a monthly basis, that in this world of regulatory environment and so many things, I think that one sometimes can get missed or forgotten about. And I recognize in some of the larger financial institutions that really can't be a
right,
consideration, which I think is sad. And I think that speaks to anybody that's looking to get financing, especially new business owners. Try to find a small or regional bank that can consider character as one of the things that would persuade them to help get your venture off the ground. You have to have one or two of the other C's for sure, but that character piece is so important. And Howard, I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that that is the power and the benefit of banking at a small or a regional bank. I mean, there's advantages to large institutions as well, but that character piece is missed. Now, you had said that
One other
there were,
thing in terms of local regional banks,
yeah,
and in the city of Eau Claire, we don't really have any community banks anymore. I mean, the if you want to have a loan or something like that, it's not going to be approved by the staff or the president of that bank that's sitting there. It's going off to some actuaries in Green Bay or in Chicago or Milwaukee,
yeah,
and that can take weeks before you get any approval or disapproval, or they need this information or that information. uh, you go into our bank, you bring your financials with you, your tax record from last year, and your evaluation of your properties and stuff like that, and what you want to do with this money that you're going to borrow, and we can make that evaluation and approve or disapprove your loan in a matter of hours or days. Where in other situations, it's going to take 30, 45 days. Just as an example, I had a larger bank here in Eau Claire that had my home loan with when this business partner went into bankruptcy. Well, I had to borrow $100,000,
mm-hmm,
and I had enough of that collateral in my house. So, and I'd just redone my loan, so I went into the bank and said, "Hey, here's the deal. Here's what I need $100,000 for. I need to give this to the courts, and this is what I'm buying with it. So I need a loan against my house because that way I could write that off for a while." And they said, "Well, yeah, you got plenty of collateral there. This is no problem whatsoever." And I said, "Well, good. When can I pick up that check?" "Well, it's got to go through our offices in Chicago, through the actuaries there. But I would think within 30 or 45 days." And I said, the courts on this bankruptcy thing, they're not going to wait around for 30 or
mm-hmm.
45 days. I'm going to need this money, within the week. And so you don't want to go to your bank that you're on the bank board of for that. The regulators don't like you doing that type of business with your local bank. Uh, and so I went with another bank in Eau Claire that at that time was a regional, was a hometown bank, but now is one of the regional bank owns it. And I had taught the kids of the guy that I talked to there, went over all of this, and I said the house was just appraised, and all of this. And he said, "Well, that's fine, no problem." He said, "I'll talk to the bank president this afternoon." And I said, "Well, when can I get this money and stuff?" This was on a Friday. And he said, "Well, I would think that we should be able to do that by Monday or Tuesday." You know, uh, so that's the difference between knowing somebody in a local community bank compared to one of the big regional banks. You might get a 1/4% less interest rate or a 0.5% interest rate, but you always have somebody there who understands your business, who knows where you're at, what you're trying to do, and can advise you and provide you with capital if what you're trying to do makes sense.
Yeah,
And
I
it
mean,
doesn't have to
it's
go through somebody in Chicago that doesn't know beans about you.
it
And so that's just one other thing I wanted to add to that is important to me in the purchase of part of a bank is that local small bank. Eventually, those are going to be the important ones if they stay around. It's
yeah.
tough banking right now.
Well, that's the thing. There's a lot of consolidation, and so it sounds like that was your second reason you were interested in buying or being an
Right,
owner in the bank is the ag side and then the local. And that is such a key point. I remember someone in my early entrepreneur years said, "Andrew, you need to." And I knew banking pretty well because I worked at a credit union throughout all of college,
right.
and was a CPA, so it was more of my bailiwick, but said establish a good banking relationship that understands you and that is local, that will support you as your business grows. And I think those words of advice were incredibly invaluable and would not have allowed me and my business partner to be as successful as we were when we were running the garbage company. until we sold it. And I think you just reiterated it. So for all of those of you out there who are in a business and you can't, if someone says, well, who do you bank with, or what does the banking process look like? Really think about that, especially for smaller businesses. Do you have a solid, trusted banking relationship in your community that they know you, you know them, and they understand your business? And you just pointed that out, and I'm glad you added that. Howard, I want to ask a few more kind of wisdom providing questions based on all the experience that you've had across multiple industries. So, we hear a lot about people's successes in our day and age, and we hear about how they go from rags to riches. I've said this many times in a short period of time, if you watch a documentary or what have you. But there's a lot of trials and there's a lot of tribulations and there are failures. For you, from a business perspective, what's one of the biggest failures you've had?
The biggest what?
Failure that you've had from a business perspective, and what did you learn from it? And what can our listeners learn from it?
Well, um, when you're out there evaluating things, and you no matter what you do for an investment, you're taking a risk. Okay, and when you do that, you have to be prepared for the happiness of things being successful. And you also have to be prepared for the fact that things sometimes aren't going to go the way that you had planned them. And life is like that. I mean, there are things that happen to us that don't involve finances and stuff like that uh, you don't plan on, but it happens. My first wife passed away at 56 years old, ovarian cancer. Well, that's a big blow, and
Yeah.
nobody would predict that. I was 10 years older than she was, so we had made the financial plans and things like that with insurance and stuff like that based on, oh, I would be the one that would probably pass away first, not
Yeah.
only being male, which passes away younger, but also the fact that I was older, and that happened, and you know uh, those types of things like that, how you prepare yourself mentally to address things that might not go the way that you had planned them. And I think I think that's important, an important concept. If you know, it's kind of like going back to the baseball team thing. No guarantees that you're going to be the winning team that year. I mean, there'll be things that happen, injuries and somebody else. I got this better guy and stuff like that, and you're going to be defeated. And uh, you prepare for that. It's not necessarily. I don't know what the percentage is of businesses that don't make it, and that you move on. You move on from that.
Yeah.
And I think the rental things at first, that was a really tense situation because we could have lost those. We were we had a lot of money borrowed against those rentals when he went bankrupt, and easily could have lost all of that. If we didn't move on that, and if we didn't have some financial partners and some other partners that said, "Hey, let's try this," and of course some legal advice. But um, yeah, there's going to be times when things don't go exactly right.
I
You got to
love,
be ready for that.
yeah, and plan for them, and sometimes plan for the most unexpected thing. One of the things that I've always loved about you, Howard, as you and I have gotten to know each other, is you're not afraid to take, even in spite of your age. You're going to be going on 80, correct?
M80,
You're
yeah, was
80.
80 May 9th, yeah.
And for our listeners, if you're not watching on the video, Howard is one of the youngest, most spry, active 80-year-olds that I've ever met. And I'm not just saying that to be nice. It's indeed true, and I think it's because you stay so active and you keep your mind active. But eh, you have always been willing to at least look at a deal and consider taking a smart, calculated risk. And, I think we've gotten a good idea of why, where you get that from. Certainly your father did a lot of that. what would you say to someone who is working for someone else, maybe in the corporate world, and they're just stuck in neutral and they know they're really entrepreneurially motivated and they want to try something, but they're either not sure, they're so afraid to take the risk. What words of advice or encouragement can you provide based on your own personality and your own experiences that might give them something different to think about and help them get past that overwhelming fear of making that leap?
Uh, here's what I told my kids as they were growing up, and that I'm trying to pass on to some of the grandkids, as they get a little bit older. Uh, if you have an idea that is going to be acceptable and make some other people's lives better, then I think that's one of the most important questions that you can ask. Is what you're going to do, whether it's picking up somebody's garbage, whether it's delivering the kids to school like my dad did, whether you're putting somebody's roof on, whether you're teaching somebody's kids, that's a service or a product that is being provided that makes people's lives better. And if people are going to be receptive of you and the plan or the idea that you have, I then uh, you should go for that. I always remember my mother. When I was a kid, it was hard to believe. People don't believe this when I tell them, but when I was a kid, I was quiet. I was shy. I I remember in I remember in seventh grade one day I had to give this report on something that I had looked up the research on it and things like this. And I was just afraid as heck to get up in front of the kids and my fellow, classmates and give this and stuff like that. And I remember when my mother told me, and I kind of lived by it, is said, Howard, I, you've got these things that other people can gain some stuff from, and you know this information. Other people don't know this yet, and you have the opportunity to let them know, what it is that you found out. And she said it's kind of like I the candle. You can have a candle lit and so forth, and it gives out light, and everybody can see it and stuff like that, and maybe even some heat. But if you put it under a bushel basket, nobody gets any benefit from the candle at all. And I remember her telling me that maybe I had some stuff that could benefit some other people if you just shared it. And I think that was good advice from my mother. My dad lived that, of course, all the time, but never put it kind of in those words. And I
Yeah.
remember that going to that day that and I did a half decent job, although I was stuttery and I was nervous and everybody knew it. But I did it mainly because I had some information that other people, could use. And I guess that's one of the things I would say is if you've got an idea, you're working for somebody and you know that, okay, I can do this better if I did this or this, then why not try that if you know for certain that it would make your life better if you had that service or you had that product, uh, then you're probably like millions of other people that could help.
That's excellent advice, Howard. And it's it's such it's very simple advice, but it's incredibly profound. And first off, that story that you told, I almost got goosebumps when you were telling, because that's such a great way to look at it. And that was about a report and sharing information, but that's a great way to think about business or people that are maybe afraid to take that leap.
Right,
You may have something, as you just said, that this world can use or people will pay you
exactly.
for, but they won't know about it if you don't take a chance on yourself, and you won't be able to accomplish that. I've never had a guest put it that way, and I think that's fantastic. And thank you for sharing that.
I always like to look at something too that if you've got a problem in front of you that seems insurmountable and stuff like that, I always kind of looked at the 1% formula. You know, if tomorrow this becomes 1% better, okay, then over a period of time, you can get a handle on this. You just take your time and you make some decisions based on the 1% rule. If I can improve this a little bit in this situation tomorrow, I then if it's 1% better within a week, you know, 7% of your problem has gone away. And sometimes because of some of the things that you do, you might have a gain of 50%. I, but other times, you know, it may not work out that way, and you're not successful. Uh, Big deal. You go on with something else.
Yeah, and that 1% rule I think is so important for entrepreneurs to remember. And I'm a generally impatient individual, and I think maybe that's with youth, but as I get older, I'm learning to be okay, not everything needs to come overnight. Patience brings good things to those who are willing to wait for it. And to your 1% rule, inch by inch, life is a cinch, yard by yard, life is hard. And
Hey,
I think
good quote.
yeah, it's a fantastic quote that my 8th grade teacher actually first introduced me to, and it's
Great.
exactly like your 1% rule. Sometimes when we're in business, we want to tackle so much and we overwhelm ourselves in our mind, as opposed to just breaking it down into the most simple elements and saying, okay, what this entire process, let's break it down into simpler parts, deal with each one, just like you said, tomorrow we'll deal with this one and we'll make it 1% better. Then the next day we'll deal with this one and we'll make it 1% better. And over time, you'll create a product or a process or an experience for your customers that is revolutionary or wildly satisfying for you. But it takes time, and you really have to break it down to make it surmountable for us as humans. And you'll ultimately develop a more solid service or product if you take your time to come up with it.
Well, no, we also live in a country where you have the freedom to be successful. You also have the freedom to to fail, and
Yeah.
I think that's important because I you learn every time that you have a failure or things didn't go the way that you wanted to. You can look back on that and say, okay, now I know how to do that a little differently. And that changes depending upon what type of product or what type of service that you're delivering. Uh, Not everybody has the same failure things or the same success things, but you learn from each one of those successes and failures.
Yeah.
You learn some things about yourself that and you have to be a little bit humble about you're not always going to be a winner, and how do you handle that when you're not?
Yeah, and I think it really is true that failure is the foundation of success. You just cannot have success without failure. And
Right.
until you can
And
accept
even
that
at 80
and
years old, I look forward to next week. I got a bank board meeting next week, which reminds me, this weekend I have to look at that packet and do some reading and looking at some of those things and get ready
yeah,
for it. But I like doing that type of thing. I'm not somebody who's going to be sitting around watching TV all day or something like this. I do have to be involved in my church. I'm involved in other community things. I like to do that type of thing. One, it keeps your mind active, and you can share some advice that might help somebody else.
yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the key to longevity is exactly the way that you're living your life. Now, you've been very gracious with your time, so I only have a couple more questions for you. One of the things that is very challenging in business and that the human psyche isn't intended for is the high highs and the low lows, the volatility of emotions, often in very short periods of time that you experience. How have you, both in your personal, professional, however you want to address this, and obviously you've faced some very challenging times with your wife passing away on the personal side of things, and I know you have in business as well. What advice would you give, or how have you personally dealt with the emotional volatility that inherently comes with being an entrepreneur or a business owner?
Well, I mentioned before that I'm active in my church, and I think it's important, and I learned that when I was young, that uh, everybody has a little godliness to them. We have our souls, and so do I. And uh, if you look upon other people as you know a segment of God, then it it allows you to it allows you to be much more objective in terms of some of the things that happen and so forth. Now, some people don't realize this and are real shysters and are cruel and are mean and stuff like that. But that's okay. I don't have to be. I mean, that's not part of what I was taught. That's not part of my psyche. Is you know Everybody has that spiritual component to them that we have to respect. And I think that's been an important thing in the back of everything in my life, is that you know in most business things and stuff like this, uh, failures weren't brought about because somebody disliked you, or somebody wanted to take you down, or somebody did something horrible to you. No, it was part of the business process. And if you can take the personalities and stuff like that out of it and objectively look at, okay, this is why this happened, and it wasn't because of Andrew, and it wasn't because of XYZ person or something like this, that it was part of the process. If you are free to succeed, you also have to have an ability to take care of the things that aren't successful. And you can't lose a lot of sleep, and you can't lose a lot of your energy on things like that, because that takes you down from what could be the next wonderful thing that might happen to you 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, I think what I just heard you said is incredibly powerful because you said, put things into perspective, put them in the context. When you're talking
Right.
about business and you're talking about spirituality, a lot of the things that we experience in life, in the secular world, when you put them into perspective, perhaps they're not as emotionally volatile as we make them. And putting those types of things, especially in the business realm, into perspective is important. And then the other thing that you said that is so key, and I think all of us as humans struggle with this, is being objective. Sometimes that's being really honest with yourself, not blaming other people, not trying to find a reason outside of the actual reason of why something failed, but be objective. Sometimes that's taking a hard look in the mirror and saying, this failed because of something I did, not because of someone else or trying to place the blame. And sometimes there are circumstances outside of your control where, I think COVID-19 is a perfect example. A lot of businesses failed
Right.
and it was outside of the control of so many things business owners, but that's part of being the objective process.
Yep.
And I think you just that you hit that so key on the head, because in this day and age in society, so much of what we see kind of brings emotion into it and tries to either lay the blame elsewhere or just doesn't face problems and solutions just objectively. Take out all the personalities, as you said, all the biases, and just look at it objectively and based on the facts. And that ultimately, when you do that, especially in business, you can come to some meaningful conclusions, whether if it's in a failure, things that you learn from, and how you can propel yourself or learn from that to the next success. And that's your third point, which is so hard to accomplish in practice, but so incredibly important to attempt to do. And that's when you failed, learn from it, but don't let it cloud your vision to be successful for the next thing. Because if you do, you're wasting so much energy and you're preventing possibly sharing something, just like you said earlier, a product or service with the world that's going to make their lives better. If
Right.
if you focus on the negativity of failure as opposed to just recognizing what was done wrong, learning from it and moving on.
I love teaching, because I could see the results of some of the things that I was doing, and you know, the fact that the bank president today is a former student of mine, I mean, is interesting from the standpoint of both of us, and we both have had a laugh over that. But the fact that he still respected me enough, after I was a sixth grade teacher, uh, to say, "Hey, yeah, no," and he knows about character too, and
Yeah.
so he could recognize the character that I had. Hopefully, some of the character flaws I didn't possess, but that he was comfortable enough with that to say, "Hey, I want you to be part of this team," and so yeah, I liked teaching because you could see the results of some of the things that you were doing, that you had the mindset of making some people's lives better. And
Yeah.
so I had the opportunity to do that every day. And some of my compatriots and some of my fellow teachers and stuff like that just didn't have that type of mindset. And I didn't mind going to work every day because that was what I had an opportunity to do.
Yeah, and sometimes you had to wait a while to see the success of your students, just like you did with
Right.
the president of the bank. But again, just like a lot of things in life, it it takes time to build something amazing and productive. But if you're willing to wait for it and give it that time, as you just described, it's incredibly satisfying, and you
Well,
get to
and
see the fruits
also
of
I
your
think
labor.
I would add that you have to have that commitment.
Yeah,
I mean, you do have to put in the time, you do have to put in the effort if you're going to get some results out at the end. This isn't just something that other people, just give you because you're a nice person and stuff like that. You do have to have the commitment to make those decisions, but also to follow through with the work ethic. And the fact that there were three of us guys that were willing to put in 90 hours a week, in your between your senior year in high school and your college, I think was important. And I also saw some other people that were willing to do that and cooperated with each other so that, hey, we could do 90 hours and still have some sleep and still keep the factory running. And there weren't very many of us that were able to do the warehousing. So, hey, we kind of had the company where we wanted them to, in a way. They appreciated the fact that if we turned in 90 hours, they were fine with it because the warehouse was running. And
yeah. Well,
so you have to have to that commitment to something too. And I'm disappointed with a lot of young people today where they do not have a commitment to the company that they're working for. I don't care whether you're serving coffee someplace, or whether you're the vice president, or whether you're managing four people, or whatever. Uh, you do have to have some kind of commitment to the customers and to your company if you're going to be a decent worker. And if you don't have that, then how are you ever going to run something? Are you going to have that commitment as soon as things where you have to make some decisions, and where you have to put in some time and you have to put in some resources? Do you have that commitment then? With you didn't really have very much commitment for 8 hours a day.
yeah.
Not
I mean that.
everybody, not everybody is cut out to do that. Not
Yeah.
everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur. I,
No, that's exactly right. But
yeah,
and I love the way you framed it as, commitment. And it one of the things that always stuck with me is, and I think we all struggle with this as humans. We say, okay, I'm serving coffee. Well, I'm better than this, right? If you can't be trusted with the small things, how in the world do you think you can
right,
be trusted with the larger things, or running a business, or running employees?
right.
And so sometimes our egos get in the way, and it starts, like you just said, at a young age. You guys were working 90 hours a week. You guys had that commitment. And I think that's such a good lesson for, certainly our young people, but quite frankly, for all of us, that commitment has to be there, because in order to endure the ups and downs, which we talked about, and so many of the struggles in business, whether in your control or outside of your control, if you don't have that commitment, you're basically doomed from the start.
But then the other thing I want to add to that is from the time I had my paper route, all the way up through when I was working at the canning factory, uh, I had money. I mean, I had the best bicycle, mainly because I needed it in my business and stuff like
Hmm.
that. But I had the resources to be able to do that, even though my parents weren't any better off than anybody else's. It was me. I was able to do that. And of course, working in the canning factory like that and getting those checks, that meant that my college, I don't have big college loans that people are paying off for the rest of their life. Uh, I was able to pay for my college because I put in a lot of hours and stuff like that to do it. And because I went the route where, I didn't go to the expensive college that, was going to cost even back then eight or $10,000 a year, a couple $1,000 a year, but still got a wonderful education,
Yeah.
and was able to get out into the workforce to make them enough money to get the rest of my education. Oh, it was the first one in our family to have an education like that, an advanced education.
Yeah, and it's because you had that commitment, and
Right.
that's if
And
you
I
have
could
that
realize that, hey, you got to have some skills of some kind. You got to learn some things,
Mhm.
in order to be successful in the field that you want to be in.
So, Howard, you've shared a lot of things today that, in quite frankly, in perspectives that I hadn't thought about. And so I'm so appreciative that you were willing to join us today. Before we conclude, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you haven't already shared, based on all of your experiences and your knowledge, that you think would be particularly helpful for entrepreneurs, people that want to be entrepreneurs and aren't sure where to go? Anything else you want to add?
I think we covered a lot of bases, and a lot of my history. In some cases, lucky, in some places not. But I, when it's not, it's how you react to that. I think that makes a difference. You learn something when you are not successful. That also makes you valuable, going forward, because now somebody else hasn't had that experience you have. You're not going to make that mistake again, hopefully. And so uh, I don't know. In life, try a bunch of things. If you if you don't try stuff, you really never find out who you are. I mean, if you're afraid of, well, like the candle in the bushel basket, that was my mother's way of saying, hey, go out there and try some stuff. And
Yeah.
some things, sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. But you will find out about yourself and what it is that you can share with others that makes their life better. I referred to our country, and thank God this weekend for those people that fought and died to help to preserve our freedoms that we have now. And God bless them. I, but I, you know, not every place in the world is there that opportunity where you have some skills or you have some ideas and you have the capability of possibly making that available to other people. You look at some of the dictatorial countries and so forth. Uh, did they invent iPhones? Did they invent computers? Did they invent electricity? Did they invent the airplane? Did they? I mean, go down the list of things that people are using today in medicine and stuff like this. That makes our lives better. Oh, Where where did these things come from? They came from people who had ideas of being able to make things better for somebody else's life, and in turn, that made life better for them because they got more of the resources that were out there because of their risk and because of their commitment and because of their talents. That's not going to happen in China. That's not going to happen in Russia. They're not going to invent the next thing, unless they steal, some stuff from the United States that enables them to put it together. It's just not
Y-
going to happen.
Yeah.
They
Eh,
discourage entrepreneurship because that means that there's something that's going to change. And to a dictatorialship or to a communist type country where the government runs everything, they don't want things to change because that's a risk to them.
you're exactly right. And to your point, we're recording this just before Memorial Day weekend. This won't come out till after Memorial Day weekend, but
Right.
to your point, we have been extremely blessed by God for all of those who have
Oh,
served for our
absolutely.
country and who have died. And we have such an opportunity in this country that so few have ever been blessed with, to be entrepreneurs, to try things, to fail things. And ultimately, we of course owe it to God, but He's given us veterans who have sacrificed their lives to try things and to fail. And to your point, think about people that have given the ultimate sacrifice. Try something. Utilize what they've given you, the freedom and the power to be able to try and fail in a relatively meaningless manner. You're not losing your life. You're going to
Right.
try a business and
Yep.
try to bring things. And again, back to putting it into perspective. And I think on that note, we almost have an obligation to those who have given us this freedom and opportunity to continue with that entrepreneurial dream. And as we've been blessed by God for everything we've been given, we also have a great responsibility to preserve and protect it, and to try to you know be thankful, I guess, in utilizing everything that we've been given, and not squander it.
Yes. Perfectly put.
Well, Howard, thank you so
Well,
much for joining us on the Andrew Holland podcast. I've had a lot of fun, as I always do. I'm so blessed to get to talk to so many entrepreneurs such as yourself that always give us words of advice and little tidbits. And it just never ceases to amaze me. Sometimes people ask or think, you interview so many different people, doesn't it kind of get repetitive? But it doesn't. Everybody has different life experiences, and everybody
right.
thinks of things in different ways. And I'm just so thankful to all the guests such as yourself that are willing to share their stories, be vulnerable, and participate. So,
Well,
Howard,
hey, now I've put something else on my 80-year-old calendar. I've participated in a podcast.
I mean,
Which I hadn't intended to in my lifetime, but
you,
thank you for that opportunity, if that's what it is, to bore people to death for an hour. And
well, it was not boring, and certainly the pleasure was all ours. And your bucket list is getting shorter.
hey, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Howard.
Appreciate it. Look forward
Have a
to
great
coffee
weekend.
again sometime.
Yep. Well, that's all the time that we have for this week's episode of the Andrew Holland podcast. As a reminder, sometimes on this podcast, we talk about financial concepts, legal concepts. Make sure that you don't hear anything on this podcast or any other podcast and take it as the absolute gospel truth and apply it to your situation. Always consult the appropriate professionals in your area. This podcast is only as good as we collectively make it. So if you have ideas, concepts, topics, guests that you want me to have on, please reach out to me on our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Shoot me an email or tweet at me on Twitter. My handle is @HollandPodcast. And we have conversations outside the podcast. Those are always fun. But certainly, if you have ideas, suggestions, send me a tweet. And I try to take all of that into consideration. Please share this with other people. If you found some interesting pieces in the podcast or something that you particularly stuck with you and you think someone you know might be interested in hearing this podcast, share it with other people. We grow primarily by one way, word of mouth. And so when you share this with other people, you help support us to continue to have the guests and support other entrepreneurs and business people every single week with this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, @Holland Podcast. That's @Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.